The United States Coast Guard, on an average day, saves 9 lives, responds to 25 pollution reports, seizes 297 pounds of marijuana and 247 kilograms of cocaine. This multi-mission service is a merger of 5 federal agencies with a history that dates back to the beginning of the Republic. It began on August 4, 1790, when President George Washington signed the congressionally approved Tariff Act requested by the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, that authorized the construction of 10 seagoing revenue cutters. Their job was to stop smuggling and help collect tariffs. These taxes were the new nation's principal source of income. The early revenue cutter sailors not only met the challenge of collecting tariffs, they battled pirates and privateers, enforced quarantine laws, and attempted to stop slave importation. As the country grew, larger, more heavily armed cutters were needed. They were built just in time to fight in the nation's first war under the Constitution, the Quasi-War with France in 1797. This war, which was fought in part to protect American trade, marked the beginning of the Coast Guard's proud military heritage. By the mid-19th century, increased trade and immigration called for additional maritime safety services. These legacy services would eventually merge into the U.S. Coast Guard. Federal life-saving stations were first authorized in 1848, and Congress formally created the Life-Saving Service to man these stations in 1878. Daring surfmen carried out countless legendary rescues. In 1896, the life-saving crew at Pea Island rescued the passengers and crew from the schooner E.S. Newman by swimming to the wrecked ship with a line and pulling each person to shore. The Steamboat Inspection Service and Bureau of Navigation were also formed in the 1800s after a series of disastrous boiler explosions and other accidents. The Coast Guard's regulatory duties developed from these organizations. Safety was also the key mission of the U.S. Lighthouse Service. Lighthouse keepers have guided ships into the nation's harbors since colonial times, and many have put their lives in peril to save others. Perhaps the most famous was a Rhode Island woman named Ida Lewis. During her more than 40 years as keeper of Lime Rock Light in the 19th century, she saved at least 18 lives and became a national celebrity. The Coast Guard has protected the environment for more than 160 years. In Alaska, they enforced early fisheries and game laws, and in 1890, Captain Mike Healy of the revenue cutter Bear supplemented the food supply of the Native Americans by transporting reindeer to the territory. The sinking of the Titanic led to yet another Coast Guard mission in the northern latitudes, the International Ice Patrol. The modern Coast Guard began in 1915 when the Revenue Cutter Service and the Life-Saving Service merged and took the name United States Coast Guard. The Coast Guard underwent its greatest expansion during World War II, growing from less than 25,000 to 240,000 civilian and military personnel, the vast majority of whom were reservists. They landed soldiers and Marines on the beaches during every major amphibious assault. At Guadalcanal, Signalman First Class Douglas Munro led the rescue of a battalion of Marines about to be overrun by the Japanese. He died after maneuvering his boat between the enemy and the evacuating Marines. For his actions, Munro was awarded the Medal of Honor. The end of the war permanently transferred the Bureau of Marine Inspection and Navigation to the Coast Guard, and the Lighthouse Service had joined the Coast Guard in 1939. The service was now truly a multi-mission organization. Ice operations expanded. In 1957, the cutters Storis, Bramble, and Spar crunched through the Northwest Passage to prove that ships building the distant early warning line could escape to the east. Wherever wars break out, the Coast Guard is called to action. On April 29, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson committed the Coast Guard to Vietnam in support of Operation Market Time, the Navy's campaign to interdict communist maritime infiltration in South Vietnam. Over time, the Coast Guard's presence grew and diversified. This included establishing explosives loading detachments, tending aids to navigation, ensuring safe port operations, and participating in combat search and rescue as part of a pilot exchange with the Air Force. From 1965 until 1973, over 8,000 Coast Guardsmen would serve in Vietnam. Today's modern Coast Guard is made up of active duty members, reservists, auxiliary, and civilians, all working together for service to nation. On waterways across the nation, from Alaska to Manhattan, the Coast Guard's presence ensures essential energy products and important cargo are delivered safely to residents and industry. Active duty members patrol our national borders, promoting and ensuring boating safety. We provide vital search and rescue service during natural disasters, as we did during Hurricane Katrina. We also coordinate response and cleanup efforts in the wake of accidents, such as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We are ready when needed to join other armed services in protecting our shores in times of conflict. The Coast Guard Reserve Force of nearly 8,000 trained men and women work alongside active duty Coast Guard personnel, performing the same tasks, especially since the attacks of September 11, 2001. The reserves have assumed an even deeper role in protecting American shorelines and the American exclusive economic zone. Reservists may be called to active duty at any time to help patrol and protect our shores. Our Coast Guard Auxiliary is an all-volunteer civilian force established by Congress to augment the Coast Guard forces by ensuring safety along the nation's coastlines and waterways, and by providing general support for Coast Guard operations and logistics. You may find an auxiliarist walking the docks, lending administrative support at a station, observing ice floes by air, or manning a radio watch. Their efforts have helped reduce loss of life, injury, and property damage. Every day, over 6,000 civilian employees in the Coast Guard work together with military personnel to save lives, enforce the law, operate ports and waterways, and protect the environment. These Coast Guard personnel work in over 200 different types of jobs in over 100 locations. Civilians play a key role in every aspect of the Coast Guard's function. The U.S. Coast Guard is a diverse group of nearly 42,000 men and women, safeguarding our nation's maritime interests in the heartland, in the ports, at sea, and all over the world. Today's multi-mission Coast Guard continues its 225-year life-saving legacy as an indispensable instrument of national security and safeguarding the lifeblood of our nation's economy as America's 21st century Coast Guard.